one day some people said to Jesus, "John the Baptist's disciples fast and pray regularly, and so do the disciples of the Pharisees. Why are your disciples always eating and drinking?" Jesus responded, "Do the wedding guests fast while celebrating with the groom? Of course not. But someday the groom will be taken away from them, and then they will fast." Then Jesus gave them this illustration. "No one tears a piece of cloth from a new garment and uses it to patch an old garment, for then the new garment would be ruined, and the patch wouldn't even match the old garment. And no one puts new wine in old wineskins, for the new wine would burst the wineskins, spilling the wine and ruining the skins. New wine must be stored in new wineskins. But no one who drinks the old wine seems to want the new wine. The old wine is just fine, they say."
You have something in your life, probably multiple things, but you have at least one thing in your life that everything else in your life is connected to, that the thought of changing it is so daunting, is so overwhelming that you're not going to do it, even if something better were out there for you, right? So this, like for a lot of people, this is a Mac PC thing. You're a Mac person, and so a PC might be better for you. It might have better features, less expensive, would work better for you, but you've been a Mac person for so long and everything in your life is connected in that universe that you just cannot imagine learning a different platform. And so you're going to keep doing the same thing you've always done, even though there's a better option for you. Your phone might be this way, your phone service provider. If you're like me, this whole like internet security thing at our home I hate every minute of it. It's so complicated. I'm not a tech person. And so I have the thing that works, and I'd pay $1,000 a month. I'm not changing it because just how hard it is. Or you have something in your life that's like this. Actually, I had someone jokingly refer to marriage this way once. They said, if it wasn't for the fact that, obviously I love my spouse and I'm committed to my spouse and I took an oath before God and all that, just the prospect of having to re-enter the dating world, our lives are so enmeshed. They're so intertwined. They're so interconnected, and it took so long to get to that place. If I had to do that again, not doing it. Anyway, there's something in your life that's like that, okay? This is the second week of our Lent series that's called What If Jesus Came? That's the rhetorical question we're asking. What if Jesus showed up today? Not baby Jesus, but, adult, walking, talking, healing Jesus. What if he showed up today, started hanging out in your friend group, working at your job, hanging out in your neighborhood, started a podcast, whatever. How would you respond to him? How would we respond to him? And essentially what I suggested last week at the beginning of the season was I think we would reject him today, just like he was rejected 2,000 years ago. And I think for basically the same reason. The reason that Jesus was rejected 2,000 years ago is what I called spiritual ignorance. Everybody is born into the world, and you receive narratives that you use to make sense of your life. You may not know that's happening because it's a very tacit process, but there are stories that you tell yourself that give your life meaning and shape. They create significance, right? If that process, though, is so tacit, it's so you don't even know it's happening. Like a fish doesn't know it's swimming in polluted waters. You just receive the narratives that you receive and you begin to live by them, and you don't have any framework or perspective to evaluate them. So the problem is if you're believing things that are not true, you don't know that. And it sets you up when Jesus comes. He comes embodying the truth. Ironically, Jesus was rejected in the name of truth. He wasn't rejected because what he was saying or doing was actually false, but everybody in his surroundings believed it was because the narratives they had accepted were false, but they didn't know it. And that's still true today. You and I still receive narratives from the world we're born into that gives our lives meaning and shape, influences everything about us. And if Jesus were to step into your world, I think his life would challenge your life just like his life challenged their life. And you would find yourself in the same situation where you got to make a choice. You're either going to accept his life or you're going to reject it. And I want to dig into it a little bit more today. And one of the big ideas, and I'm just going to be candid with you, there are times where I show up and I've got something that I think I need to talk about, and I feel like what I've kind of prepared to say sort of nails it. This is one of those where this feels a little fuzzy to me, so you'll be the judge. The narratives that you use to make sense of your life, they are not just ideas. Okay, they are not just ideas. They are whole, comprehensive meaning frameworks. They are worldviews. Okay, in the world of psychology, they're called gestalts. Every single thing about you is driven by the narratives that you accept, all the way down to how your bodies occupy time and space. Okay, they're not just ideas. Ideas are not just ideas. That's why they're so powerful. An idea is going to shift and change the way that you actually move in the world, what you say and don't say, what you do and don't do, where you go and don't go. Okay, so the narratives that you use to make sense of your life, they're not just ideas. They're whole meaning frameworks that influence everything about you, not just like mentally, cognitively, but emotionally, socially, and physically. Quite frankly, they influence how your brain is wired, how your synapses fire, how your muscles move in the world. Okay, another way to think about this is that you are always trying to incarnate your stories, bring them to flesh, that's what incarnate means. It means put flesh on, put meat on. You're always trying to embody your narratives. You do not live with a bunch of like theories in your brain. You're taking your ideas and you're trying to make them happen. If you thought that, for instance, wealth would make you happy, well, you're not just going to walk around believing that. You're actually going to try and get rich, or you're at least going to try to get richer than you are right now. You're always going to try to bring your stories into life, to embody them, because that's how it works. Narratives are not just ideas. They are whole, comprehensive meaning frameworks, worldviews that shape everything about you. Okay? If you can kind of grab onto that, God is in the story challenging business. If you have accepted narratives that are not true, and those stories have shaped everything about you, you have a good, loving, and gracious God who's looking at you just like a loving parent would look at their kids and say, that's not true. That's not good for you to live in that space. I got to figure out how to help you see that. So God's kind of in the story challenging business. But because the stories that you and I pick up and deeply internalize aren't just ideas, but they're whole embodied ways of living in the world, the only way for God to effectively challenge your stories, if God incarnates the alternative, embodies the alternative. And for Christian people, we think that's what's happening in the life of Jesus of Nazareth. Jesus is not an idea. Because a lot of times people engage with God as if God were an idea. And ideas can be, you can accept them or reject them. You can think about them, you can not think about them. You can kind of put them on the shelf over there and pretend like they don't exist. Ideas can be kind of amorphous. Or you can hijack an idea. You can take an idea that was meant to do one thing, and you can hijack it and manipulate it and use it to justify something that was never intended for. Ideas are dangerous in that way. God is not an idea. God incarnates God's self, puts meat on, flesh and blood, and walks around in the world, right? So that Jesus' life, his embodied life, is an embodied judgment of our lives. Jesus isn't an idea walking around the dusty roads of first century Palestine, how his body operates in the world, what he says and does not say, where he goes and does not go, what he does and does not do, who he spends time with, who he does not spend time with, what he affirms, what he judges. All of that happening in time and space is a flesh and blood judgment of the alternative. The narratives that you use to make sense of your life, right? They're not just ideas. They are that thing. They're like the Mac or the PC. Everything about you is connected to them, all the way down to how you occupy space and time. So when Jesus shows up as a kind of embodied alternative, Jesus isn't just showing up and offering you some ideas that he'd like you to think about or not think about. His whole embodied existence is communicating to you, My way is the right way. Your way is the wrong way. So you're either going to accept me and my life, and you're going to apprentice yourself to me and start doing it this way, or you're doing it the wrong way. You can imagine now, if you can latch on to these ideas, why Jesus would get rejected so easily, even though his life is so beautiful. Because when everything about you is connected to this thing, and then someone comes along and says, you got to change that. On some level, you know, even if you don't think so much about it, you know, well, if I accept that, then I'm going to have to accept that, and then I'm going to have to accept that, and I'm going to have to challenge that, and I'm going to have to let go of that, because it's all interconnected. And then you find yourself in a place where you have to make a hard choice now. Am I going to do all of that? The ideas are nice because you can kind of leave them or take them, or you can decide where you're going to apply them or where you're not going to apply them. But when you have an embodied life in front of you, and he's saying, go that way, do this, do that, you can recognize, man, if one domino falls, they're all going to go. And am I really able or willing to do that kind of total life overhaul? And most people are not. And that's what's going on in this passage that you heard this morning. I was struck this morning as I was listening to this being read in the first service. It hadn't occurred to me, but this was the passage that I chose. 13 years ago, my very first Sunday here. This was my first Sunday. This was the passage I chose. I think I titled it New Wine Anyone? ? And if I recall, the kind of like take-home, first Sunday, just so you know, first Sunday, 13 years ago, brand new church, never been a pastor before. Just so you know, I didn't like adopt this posture recently, okay? And essentially my message was like, look, gang, Jesus is an equal housing offender. He does not care if you are a Republican or a Democrat. He does not care if you are male or female, rich or poor, formally educated or not. He does not care. If there is something about your life that he thinks is a falsity, he's coming for it. And if you are not willing to give it up, you have no place with him. So if you are not, and that's what the sort of take-home message here is about, this kind of like flexibility. Am I willing to be challenged? Am I willing to be made uncomfortable? Am I willing to acknowledge that there might be some things about my life that are not okay, not good for me, not good for other people? Because Jesus tells us a little parable, right, about wine and patches of cloth. You know, in the first century world, you know, they made wine by stomping on grapes. That initiated a fermentation process, right? Gave off a lot of gas. So they would keep this new wine in these big stone collection vats for a little while, 3-4 days, kind of during that initial fermentation process. And then after that, the wine would still be fermenting. It'd still be giving off gas, but not as much. So you could take it out of the collection vats and you could put it in receptacles like, you know, clay jars. Or they made wineskins out of goat skin, tanned leather goat skins that they would sew together, okay? And so you could put the wine in that because it wasn't giving off as much gas anymore. It was still giving off some, but not as much. But if you had a brand new wineskin, okay, that wineskin had enough flexibility to handle that. So it was okay. You could put new wine into a new skin because it had enough flexibility to handle the fermentation that was going on. But if you had an old skin that had been used before and it had been kind of already sort of stretched out, and you tried to put new wine in that, the amount of fermentation that was still happening could burst the skin. So nobody did that. So everybody would have understood this illustration. What Jesus is effectively saying is like, I'm like new wine. And he's talking to a kind of entrenched religious establishment. And he's like, I'm like new wine, okay? And you folks are like old wineskins. You just have lost either the ability or the willingness to adapt, to flex, to stretch, to change. And that's all the way down to how you bodily live in the world. I mean, it's not unimportant that this passage begins with a question about fasting, like what you eat and don't eat, and when you eat it and when you don't eat it. They had a narrative that made sense of everything about their world, including what they put in their bodies and when they did that. And they come to Jesus and they say, Jesus, every religious person that we've ever met regularly fasts. Like they abstain from food at regular times, and we all have reasons for that. Like John does it, John's disciples do it, the Pharisees all do it, their disciples all do it. Every religious person we've ever known fasts. But here you are, this supposedly religious person, a rabbi, a traveling teacher, a God-man, and not only do you not fast, you and your disciples always seem to be partying. You're eating and drinking all the time. They do not have a compartment in their brain to comprehend what they are experiencing in Jesus' bodily life. He's doing things. And you've had this experience. Someone says something or does something, and you just have this like visceral reaction to it. You don't even know where it's coming from. You're not thinking about it so much. You're just reacting because the narrative that has so deeply and tacitly shaped how you understand everything is being challenged bodily. Someone's doing something. And that must mean he's living by a totally different story. But you can't comprehend that. So you have just this guttural, visceral reaction to it. What is going on here? And Jesus' response is essentially to give them this lesson about flexibility. Gang, you have clearly adopted some narrative that has shaped your whole life. So you just assume uncritically that people are supposed to do A, B, and C. And because I don't do A, B, and C, you just assume I'm wrong. Maybe we ought to talk about your assumptions. Maybe you're wrong. And they're in that place. You've probably been there. I have been there. If you have not been there yet and you stay here long enough, you will be there. You're going to find yourself in that place where you have to contemplate, okay, I'm hearing something, seeing something, watching something that's different than I've experienced before. I am being asked to adapt, to be challenged, to be remolded, reshaped, reframed. Do I have the requisite flexibility to do that? There are two reasons for being inflexible that I can think of. One is you're just incapable. Okay, God did not make you into the kind of person who can bend over and touch their toes, or you just haven't handled your body in such a way that you can reach over and touch your toes. It's not that you don't want to. You'd love to do that. You haven't done that in 20 years. That would be great. But you just physically can't right now. And that's okay. That's a can't thing. It's just an admission that where I am right now, there are some things I can do and some things I can't do. And if everybody's on a spiritual journey, that describes all of us. All of us, wherever you happen to be, there is probably a step God would love for you to take. You just may not be ready to take that step. Years and years ago, I mean, this was probably, 20 years ago now at this point, I became a friend with a young man who grew up in a Muslim home. And over the course of years, through our friendship, he started following Jesus, became a Christian, got baptized. His family disowned him, so they kicked him out of his house. And so he, was basically looking at being homeless. And so he came and lived with me and Carrie for a little while. And one morning, and I'd like to say I just did this because I was naive and I wasn't thinking about it, and I wasn't trying to push any buttons. But I made a full breakfast. Eggs, fruit, toast, whatever, but I also included bacon. And so we sat down to eat breakfast, and this guy was a voracious eater. I mean, he would eat everything. So he eats all the eggs and the muffins and whatever, but he doesn't touch the bacon. And of course, I realized what I had done. Muslims are not allowed to eat pork, and he'd never eaten pork in his life. And of course, he had been raised in a religious culture where you were not allowed to do that. And so it wasn't just that he didn't have the taste for it. He had never tasted it. It was an illicit practice. You're not allowed to do it. And that was so deeply entrenched in him that as he sits at my kitchen, now a follower of Christ, his body can't do it. And so I just looked at him and said, that's totally fine. Like, you never have to eat that your whole life if you don't want to. That's fine. Like, there's nothing sacred. I mean, there is something sacred about bacon, but it's fine. It's fine. Like, you're not a good person or bad person if you do or you don't eat it. I mean, this is a basic teaching in the New Testament. Take it or leave it. It doesn't matter. I just want you to know you can. You used to be in a world where you were told you couldn't. As a follower of Christ, you can. So should the day ever come where you kind of feel like you want to, you're allowed. It's not illicit for you anymore. And eventually it did, and he realized what he'd been missing his whole life. Again, looking back, it wasn't intentional. I'm just using it as an illustration to say we are all in a place where, because of how we have been kind of raised and or religiously programmed, we have thoughts about everything, feelings, deep convictions about stuff, most of which we've probably never scrutinized. And so there are just going to be things that when you encounter something, you just can't go there yet. Not because you don't want to, but because you just don't have the ability right now. I mean, I have been doing this now for 13 years. I've had plenty of conversations with people who, because of where they come from, because of the religious programming they received or whatever, they just don't have the appropriate musculature and ligature to stretch. It just wasn't built into them, right? Maybe they were raised in an environment where it was like, this is the stuff that you believe and don't ever deviate from it. And so that's just how they grew. They grew up in this, like, now everything's very rigid and you got to protect stuff, okay? And that happens. Okay, we're all there. That describes all of us. There's nothing wrong with being at a place where you can kind of look down the road. You can acknowledge that maybe Jesus' life is asking you to do something. And you all probably have something like that. If I just create a pregnant pause here, you'll think of it. There's something that if you just look at Jesus' life and then you look at your life right now, you would be able to say, Jesus probably would prefer I do this instead. And if you're at a place where you're just like, okay, I acknowledge that, I admit it, I say that it's correct, I just can't take that full step yet. We're all there. We're all there. That's just being on journey, okay? But the other reason for being inflexible isn't because you aren't able, it's because you don't want to. You are not willing. My father, who my mom and dad go here, but my dad used to be a school superintendent. Before he was a school superintendent, he taught health and physical education. And I remember one summer, so I was in high school still. I was in the gym one summer day, and I was working out and drilling for summer basketball. And he was in the same gym teaching a summer PE class at my high school. So all the kids are lined up, and I'm doing dribbling drills and shooting drills, and my dad's instructing this class. And he tells everybody, "Okay, class, we're going to start. We're going to stretch." Okay, I want everybody to reach down and touch your toes. And there's this kid in the back, athletic kid, kind of tall, lanky kid, like Gumby, could probably like wrap his hands under his feet, but he's like, "Ah," And so my dad says, "Hey, come on," like encourages him. "Hey, come on, let's get down, reach down, touch those toes." And he just keeps doing this. And my dad can see what's going on. It isn't that this kid can't reach down and touch his toes. He doesn't want to. So my dad walks over and stands next to him and, again, gently encourages him. "Hey, come on. Yeah, you can get down there. Reach down and touch those toes. Come on, you can do it." And the kid's like, "Oh, I can't do it. And, really? You can't do it. You can't reach down and touch your toes. "No, I can't. This is as low as I can go, I swear." So my dad pulls his wallet out of his back pocket, opens it up, takes a $20 bill out of his pocket, throws it on the ground at the kid's feet. Boom! He was like, seriously, totally true story. It's like a miracle. He's healed. Like, he can do it. He could tell, and you've all been there, you're working with someone. It's not that you can't. It's that you don't want to. And I think this is maybe the kind of inflexibility that Jesus is talking about with this group of people. It's not that they lacked the cognitive ability to recognize what he was saying and what he was doing. It's that they had a whole entrenched existence. They went certain places and did certain things and ate certain things and didn't eat certain things. And acted in certain ways and avoided stuff and hung out with some people and didn't hang out with others. They had a whole meaning framework just like you do. And that shaped like where they went on Saturday, like what they did with their bodies. And here's Jesus saying, I want you to do something different. I'm inviting you to do something different. They're not stupid. They can understand if I go down this road with you, you're not just asking me to accept like a theory, like a pick or choose, take or leave it idea. If I go down this road with you, I am going to have to overhaul my entire embodied life. Everything. And I'm just not willing to do that. I'm just not going to go there. And they don't say this. Maybe they're feeling it. I have felt it. I've watched people have this experience. It's like that scene from The Matrix when the guy's eating the steak and he's like, I know this isn't real. I know it's not real, but ignorance is bliss, but it tastes good. It's like the Israelites in the Hebrew Old Testament, Hebrew scriptures. Moses leads them out of slavery. 400 years they've been slaves. And he's literally leading them to like the promised land, like a liberated state where they're going to get to be their own people. 400 years. And at one point during the journey, they ask Moses if they can go back. And as crazy as that sounds, it must have sounded crazy to Moses. And he says, why would you want to do that? And their answer is basically because we had food there. Yeah, we were slaves. We had to work 23-hour days. They beat us without mercy. They killed our children, but they gave us 3 hots and a cot. I don't know, you could get a better picture of it was enslavement, it was false, it was horrific, but we knew it. It was what we knew. If you've ever seen the movie Shawshank Redemption, this is what happens to Brooks. He's been in prison his entire life, like decades, 6, 7 decades, like an elderly man, and he's been in prison since he was a teenager. It's the only world he knows. And in prison, he is somebody. He knows the culture. His friends are there. He knows how to navigate the building. He's got stuff to do. He's got a whole framework of meaning that makes life in prison okay. Well, then the worst conceivable thing happens to him. He gets paroled. And now he's a free man. He's out of prison for the first time in 60 years, his entire life. But he doesn't know what to do with himself because now this is a whole different meaning framework that he doesn't know what to do with his body. He contemplates actually committing a crime just so they'll send him back to prison. It's prison, but at least he understands it. He knows it. It's comfortable. So many of us are like this. We have lives that have been built and reinforced for decades on narratives that are not true. And Jesus comes along and his life is an embodied judgment on those narratives. Everything he says and does is a challenging invitation to us to change. Stop doing that and start doing this. But we're all capable of recognizing if we go down that road with Jesus, it doesn't stop. It never stops. It means an overhaul of your whole existence. And on some level, I think we can see that on the front end and we just go, yeah, no. But we might pay Jesus lip service. So we say we believe in Jesus, we accept Jesus, but we're treating Jesus like an idea. So Jesus is an idea that we'll put over here. So there's all kinds of departments of our life that he's not going to influence at all. So you can't do that with an embodied life. You can do that with ideas, but you can't do that with an embodied life. With ideas, you can hijack, you can manipulate, and people do this. Christians do this. We take Jesus as idea, we hijack him, and then we use him, we manipulate him, and we use him to justify all kinds of things. Look, you can't do that with an embodied life. You cannot unashamedly pursue wealth, fame, and power in the name of Jesus. You cannot do that because he didn't do it. If Jesus is an idea, you can. But if Jesus is a person, you can't. Did he pursue wealth, fame, and power? No. Did he tell his disciples to pursue wealth, fame, and power? No. In fact, he told them not to. So you can't do that. Did Jesus ever go on profanity-laced tirades? No, he did not. So you can't, use freedom in Christ language to go on profanity-laced tirades. You can't use Jesus to justify beliefs, feelings, words, actions that he didn't believe, he didn't say, he didn't do, and there's no way he would have done. That's the whole point. Because Jesus is an embodied life, it is a judgment on how we embody our lives. If you are going to follow Jesus, if you're going to accept him, be his apprentice, then everything about your life, everything, simply becomes, not to be cliche about it, but it's like, look at his life. What did he do? What did he not do? You can't accumulate endlessly and give nothing. You can't do that and be an apprentice of Jesus. It's just not how he does things. You have to be the kind of person who chooses to accumulate sparingly and works toward giving extravagantly because that's who he is. But that's really hard. Because if you happen to be in a place where you're accumulating extravagantly and giving nothing, you're going to have to change some stuff. Like real things that you're like, how you're behaving in the world, what you're buying or not buying or decisions you're making. And that is very difficult. And that's just one department of life. There are countless where you're going to find yourself confronted with the embodied life of Jesus, and you're going to have to decide. Am I going to go down that road knowing that it's not just an idea that I'm accepting or rejecting? It is a whole overhaul of my life. The people to whom he was speaking were not willing to do that. The invitation of this season of Lent is for you to ask yourself, am I willing? And to be honest about the answer. What if Jesus came today, lived exactly the way he lived, said and did all the things that he said and did 2,000 years ago? His embodied life would be a judgment on my embodied life. And I would have to decide if I'm going to begin changing the way I operate in the world because of him, or if that's just too much. My hope and prayer, obviously, for us as a church is that will never be too much. That you might be in a place where you're not able right now, and that's okay, because that describes all of us. But that you never use, I'm not able as an excuse to hide, I'm actually not willing. That we would always be people who are willing to take the next step in the direction of Jesus' life. I'm going to give you that opportunity now. We're going to finish our service this morning by taking communion together. The sacrament of communion is a sacrament of remembrance. We are remembering every week. Just as Sarah Beth said, we're being shaped in ways that maybe we're not even aware of. But when you come forward, you are remembering that God is a God of unfailing love and faithfulness, breaks his own body and sheds his own blood for you, his children, whom he loves. We're remembering that every week so that when push comes to shove and he asks you to do something, you remember who it is that's asking you. But to come forward and take the elements it's also an act of participation. It's your way of saying, okay, right now, there are all kinds of things maybe I'm not able to do just yet, but I'm willing. I'm not going to be unwilling. Coming forward and taking these elements is your profession of faith this morning, that you can look at Jesus' life. You know what he wants of you. You know what he has planned for you in terms of who you are and how you live. Coming forward and taking the elements is just your way today of saying, I'm willing to go down that road. One step at a time, but I'm willing to go down that road. If that's who you are, if that's where you are, then the invitation is to come forward, participate in communion, be a part of the church, be on the same journey that everybody else is on. If you've not done this with us before, in just a second, I'll invite you to stand. I'll dismiss you starting in the back rows. Come down our center aisle here. We'll have communion on both sides of the stage. You can take a prepackaged communion cup. back to your seat using the side aisles. Take that during this last song as you feel led, and I'll come up in a couple minutes to close us. Okay, let me invite you to stand. I'll pray for us. God, we thank you that you came to be with us in the person of your Son, Jesus of Nazareth, that his life we recognize as a judgment of our lives. Pray that we would have the faith and the flexibility, the willingness to be stretched, to grow, to adapt, to change. We confess that that's hard. We do not do that very well. We continue to lean into and accept your mercy. Be patient with us. Continue to help us grow up into the people that you desire for us to be. We love you and we thank you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.